Goodreads is the most influential social reading platform. Its annual awards shape what millions will read next.
And if you don't believe us, see what Mark Lawrence published a few days ago.
A simple nomination rocketed his latest book to the top of thousands of to-be-read list. And the drama escalates this year with Goodreads overlooking booktube gems, introducing a new very polarizing category, removing one category, and also stirring up author misrepresentation controversies. So I'm here today sharing with you all the data, all the numbers that we have so that you can get your mind around all of these and just decide by yourself what you think about Goodreads. And let's start with one of the most criticized aspects of Goodreads, which is how are these different books just get nominated for the Goodreads Choice Awards. On purpose, we don't really know what is the criteria for a book to appear in the nominations. We know that there's a time frame, so it needs to be released from November to November this year to appear on the list. And there's also kind of like a quality criteria because the book at least needs to have 3.50 something ratings in order to appear in the nomination. But that's it. They only tell us that the list is curated based on popularity, based on the number of times that a book has been read. But I really like an idea and a thread that I thought was really well informed that I found on Reddit. I will link all the details in the description. That tells us that the fact that it's making a book appear in the nominations is the number of times that book was shelved. I updated the numbers for this year within the fantasy categories so that we can come and see some of the aspects that are more controversial, such as is it a popularity contest, and also there are booktube gems that we really like and that are missing. Is it something that Goodreads is doing on purpose or no? Let's see. The book that was the most shelved was Hellbent by Lee Verdugo, and it was shelved throughout this year more than 300,000 times. On the other side of the spectrum, we have the book that was shelved the least, and that is Benko with 56,000 times. Even The Will of the Many, which it's kind of like a hidden gem if you just go and see the number of ratings, is still above it. So we can say that this is the threshold. We need a book to be shelved more in order to appear in this list. So now, according to this theory, what you need to do is if you're missing a book that you really believe it should be here, go to those book statistics and check the amount of times that a book was mentioned. Throughout the research, and I asked different readers like you, and I also went very deep into different Reddit threads, I extracted some books that were released this year and that did not appear on this list, and then I ranked the times that it was shelved, and I only found one that it should be in this list. Yumi and the Nightmare Painter was shelved 72,000 times, so you can say that as Sanderson appeared already one time, it's fair that he only appears one time. But in the category, actually, if a book has been released and by the same author, but it's standalone, so it's not the same series, the criteria, it's not excluding this book. So
I am enraged that this one it's not there.
But the rest of the books that I saw, such as He Who Drowned the World, Daughters of Isar, Waybound, the last book in the Cradle series, Tyranny of the Faith, Blood of a Bright Haven, a lot of great books sadly are still hidden gems and were not shelved, not even close. The one that got the shelving higher was He Who Drowned the World, which was shelved only 42,000 times. So I hope that with this information, at least you can know a little bit more what it's the criteria and think for yourself if it's a book that should be in this nomination. But then the nomination process and the winners are usually what it's considered a popularity contest, because if we are talking that we have 20 nominees, it's really hard for someone to read all of those books this year, not only because 20 books it's a lot, but also because all of them are new releases. I don't know the share of people that really has read more than even 5 books in this list, but at the end of the day, people rate the books that they've read or the ones that they believe they will like because it's from an author that they enjoy. But that also makes the proper nomination and the proper awards a little bit biased towards authors that are more known. Another element that it's generating absolute chaos is that we have another fantasy category, which in theory it's good news because now fantasy has 3 categories: fantasy, young adult fantasy, and the new category romantasy, which is fantasy romance. Now this has been a very polarizing element. These past years Goodreads was really criticized because a lot of fantasy romance books were blended in this category and it just overpowered. We had a Sarah J. Maas, a Jennifer L. Armentrout, so books from authors that are gaining a lot of popularity, and there was a lot of people saying that these books were just more popular and that instantly those were going to win. And now we have another category. In this category we have, for example, Fourth Wing or the latest book of Jennifer L. Armentrout. Meanwhile, in the fantasy category we have Brando Sando, Lee Verdugo, or we have Samantha Shannon. But there's a lot of controversy, and I actually don't know really what to think about this, because I can see the value of having other category, and I'm very happy that fantasy it's propagating and it just getting a lot of more accessibility to a lot of people, and that we get the opportunity to know plus 20 books from this subgenre. But on the other hand, there are some challenges already. The first one is, what is the criteria really to label a fantasy romance or a romantasy book? We already have one book in this category that was mislabeled in this list. So I wonder how many challenges are we going to be facing with this. Traditionally, I believe the criteria is that depending on the publisher, the book will go to one side or another, because in origin, this goes towards selling the books and trying to find a proper audience. Fourth Wing, it's kind of labeled as fantasy romance, but there's also a lot of action. It is also adult fantasy. It is an in-between, but because it is published from a romance publisher, then it makes sense that it's in the romantasy section. Meanwhile, the Hurricane Wars has been published by Orbit, which is traditionally an adult fantasy publisher. So what is happening here? There's also no clear limit or threshold to tell us that a book it's fantasy romance or that there's romance in an adult fantasy book. It is very confusing, and there's one point that it's really concerning me, which is the potential gatekeeping. People tend to make what they like. And one thing that I'm terrified about is that now we start making even more gatekeeping around what fantasy is, and try to separate really clearly that that's fantasy romance and that one thing don't need to communicate with another. But we shall see what happens. Let me know your opinion down below. Are you happy with the differences or not? Because definitely it's a polarizing category. Also, we got removed of the middle grade category, which there's a lot of people saying that it's a shame, because it was one of the main sources in which these middle grade books were discovered. But on the other hand, we have people saying that as Goodreads, it's a social account that only people from a certain age can use. Having middle grade or children book that were not properly rated by this audience was not really well represented, and that therefore was not really achieving the purpose. So I leave it to you to think whatever you believe here, and let me know again what is your opinion. The last point, and it's perhaps the one that it's the most complex to tackle, so please bear with me here. It's the author misrepresentation and all the controversy that we are having here. And let's go to the data and to the stats. We see here that the authors that were picked up for the books in the latest years are a majority female. This trend changed through time. In 2012, we have a majority of male authors represented, but from 2015, this was a tipping point and the trend changed. It's starting to see more female authors. The peak of that representation was last year, when we had 80% female versus 20% male. This year, it's 25% male, 75% female. And this is generating a lot of controversy. I think it's interesting also to know that the demographics of the people that it's using the proper platform might have an effect on biasing the selection of these books. There's been a lot of discussions that, for example, what we see in Reddit or even in booktube, it's not represented here, and there's a lot of good authors. And if you see the demographics, the last census of Reddit, which was in 2020, we have that 70% were represented as male, then 27% was female, and 1.5% was non-binary. Meanwhile, on Goodreads, the trend changes, and we see that around 61% were female, and the 39% that remains was represented by males. So you see already that the type of users that consume this different platform inherently might have different taste, and that it's not really a representation of the whole population, and therefore there might be differences here. The last point, and it's the most shady of all of them, it's their ratings. Yes, Goodreads rates books from 1 to 5. There's no clear criteria as of why someone rates 1 star and also 5 stars. It's not that you introduce different aspects of the book and then Goodreads just push that. At its core, reading it's very subjective, and not having different parameters that helps us understand how those ratings are created, then you will have very popular books with incredibly high ratings that are just very bad. There's no clear explanation, and therefore it's really complex to decide just for the rating on itself if it makes sense or not. But you have the reviews, which actually it's super useful. But we face the second challenge here, because there is a lot of times in which people don't properly tag the comments and you just see lots of spoilers that are not necessarily considered spoilers for other people. At the end of the day, it's not really easy if you want to decide if a book is for you or not using Goodreads if you don't want to be spoiled. There are other alternatives such as Storygraph where you can see other elements and more of a deep dive of the proper book in terms of pacing, character, arcs. There's a little bit more to just extract that rating. I'm very keen to see your opinion here, and hopefully we can have good but very constructive discussions around the purpose of these choice awards, of Goodreads as a platform and its limitations. I hope to see you soon, and thank you so much to my Patreons who joined the Inkwodian Society and are helping me and others save the book spirits with a monthly book club and weekly reading challenges.